All right, class, we're ready to start our class for this morning. Thank you so much for coming for today's class in software project management. So we just about to start our session. Let me share my webcam here. All right, that's good. We in and we can start. Sorry for the delay. I've not started immediately, but I'm ready for us to continue now. So as we normally do, let me get a few confirmations about our audio. Are we getting our audio clearly on your end? How is the audio? So that we sure that we are communicating well. All right. Thank you for several of you who have already confirmed that audio is good. We thank God for that. And so we can go ahead and start our class for today. Thank you. So many of you, Kasure, Brian, Amudo, Odhiambo, Robert Abuko, Abiero. Yes, all of you, Naftali, that's Naftali, yes, that's good. Reu Nyangao, you are confirming about the audio is good. Thank you for that. So we're ready to continue. Then let me now share the document that we'll be using for discussion. So today we start looking at the area of time management and the scheduling of activities. So let me share the document that we'll be using to guide us in our today's discussion. But before we go to look at time management, let me first of all take us back to what we did the very last session that we had. We are looking at something we are calling work breakdown schedule. And let me just revisit that one briefly. So let me first of all put on share my screen with the document we're going to call work breakdown structure example. This is an example. I will not be bringing up the main document that we use for our discussion, but just picking from what we did. But just look at an example here. It is just for the sake of a discussion, or just a kind of a recap. So let me just share this document. It has an example that just to take us to the discussion. Just briefly, I'll look at do a short recap on work breakdown structure. I think the document is now showing on your end, so we can look at that. So the document is displaying on your end here. So I hope that is the case. Well, so good. So this is just an example, right? It's just an example of the work breakdown structure. How we have to consider when we probably are told to maybe consider or draw a work breakdown structure, and how we go about that. Of course, will not be detailed because it's just a recap, just reminding us a few things about the work breakdown structure. And this is an example of a work breakdown structure. Now, this, of course, this document was is talking of an exercise. So this was based on giving an exercise on this area. So this exercise, we are to arrange the following activities into the WBS to show how the work items decompose into activities. Now, it doesn't even introduce what this project is about, but it's a project of a planning for a wedding in the wedding activities artists. It's not really planning for a wedding, but organizing for, of course, it's part of the same. If you are planning for a wedding, what do you need to consider? What do you need to put together? And this seems like it is more based on what would be more the thought of the bride, because I see talking about dress. I don't see anything about things that relate to the male side of the wedding. But anyway, so on the because of course some things here are not planned by the bride alone, of course, but the items that I see on the list seem to be about what the bride would be especially thinking about or planning on. And so if these are the activities that we consider important in the planning ourselves for a wedding, so how would we now fit these ones into a work breakdown structure? How would we fit those ones into a work breakdown structure? And so it's quite a long list. Of course, this is not exhaustive. Of course, this is just an exercise. But if you have to consider these as some of the key items that need to be considered, shop for shoes, create a guest list, have the tailoring and fitting done, shop for the dress, find the caterer, cater the wedding. In other words, now provide, go ahead and now maybe provide, the feeding for the guests, of course. Wait for replies, of course, RSVPs for those that are invited. Mail the invitations, finalize the menu, print the invitations, choose the bouquet, the bouquet. Now you notice that these items, the list, the way it is done, is not showing any order. It's just picking important items that needs to be considered for the wedding to happen in the best way that the bride, in this case, would like to see happening. So we need now to arrange these ones into a work breakdown structure. Now, of course, this is a part of it. Putting this list is part of doing the work breakdown structure, but the work breakdown structure also has a certain order, what we call the hierarchy. So we say the work breakdown structure is a hierarchical arrangement of the activities for a project. So there needs to be a certain order that these items should follow. So even we say that you can have two approaches to developing the work breakdown structure. You can arrange the work breakdown structure using a diagram, but you can also do it as just a text. But this one now, the list we have here is not a work breakdown structure. It is simply a list of items that needs to be considered and thought about, and of course made available when the whole process is going on in preparing for a wedding. But down here, let me bring the diagram. We see the diagram of a work breakdown structure now. So this is a diagram of a work breakdown structure. I'm going to reduce it just kidogo so it can show a little more better on our screen. Just squeeze it a bit. Of course, I will not be able to see top to bottom because again that one might be too small. but let's just bring as many items as we can up. Now, actually, this work breakdown structure, as we said, is supposed to be an exercise, and so it has not been. It is, you notice that it has boxes that are empty, and that, of course, was supposed to be the exercise. So this is supposed to be the exercise that the document is talking about. So you see here it says, arrange the following activities into the WBS to show how the work items decompose into activities. So when you go to the work breakdown structure, you need now to have some order for your activities and how they relate to each other. And so, of course, a few items have already been filled up for us. Let me remove my selection of this document. Right, it's not letting go. I need to remove the selection, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So with this work breakdown structure, the way the diagram is drawn, if we are to draw now the complete work breakdown structure, we always have one box at the very top. So there is one box at the very top, and that box at the very top indicates what we are trying to work on, what the end result. So that should be the end result of doing the project. What is the end result of doing the project? And then that can be what we can call a product, or it can be a service, because it's what we are trying to develop. What are we developing? So if it's something that is physical, of course, we should have something physical, but physical may be described again in different ways depending on what really one is trying to achieve through the project. Now, in this case, what we want is a wedding. So wedding, so it's like a wedding is ready to be done. So our final product of this process is the wedding to be done. So what do we need to put together for the wedding to be done? So you continue now to break down your activities and items, because it will all depend. Sometimes it's activities and also sometimes it's items. And we say that you can have a hybrid WBS where you mix activities and items. You know, you have items normally represented in a noun form. So nouns, we are having items, but sometimes we have activities which, we have, yes, I can call them activities, or the processes, the processing activities that goes on when you are trying to execute. How do you execute? And there, so we have verbs which are actions. So you have actions that are going on in the project. So if you have actions, mainly actions, then it is a process WBS. If you have mainly items, which are mainly nouns, then you have a product WBS. But once in a while, we mix the two. Now, this one there looks like it's more meant to be, or it is intended to be a product WBS, where you have items. Nouns are the main ones. Although when I look at the list, I think it should be a hybrid. Yeah, because you have shop, create, have the tailoring and fitting done, shop for the dress. All these sound more of actions, cater for wedding. So I think, except for the top here, but when we come to the diagram here, we see more of items, invitations, food, bridal. So I think maybe the complete of that should be bridal party. So if a bridal party is ready and food is ready, or at least is catered for, we know that everything is ready as regards the food. Invitations are all done, and now we know who is coming, or at least the number. Of course, that would be important for planning. So we have these are more of they announce. So it's like looks like these should be or whoever designed these seemed to intend it to be a hybrid WBS. So what is expected of going through the process is now to fill in the boxes. But let me just highlight something here that we say that whatever the box, when you have a box at a certain level, then the items below that box, the items that come directly below that box, in other words, the ones which are linked directly to the top, the box above them, then those boxes should build up to what is above. So those boxes below should always build up to what is above. And therefore, what we say here is that, so here we have the top box, and we have these three boxes here. Sorry for that. We have these three boxes here. So these three boxes here indicate that when you have, of course, these are like confirmed invitations. Now you know who is coming. Sorry, I'm always doing something here that is reducing my screen. Okay, so so when you have confirmed invitations, and so of course that should have led to knowing how much food is supposed to be made, and then now you know it is available. Of course, it's ready to be supplied, maybe to be served at the right time. The bridal party is there. Then you are now ready for the wedding. The wedding can go on, or at least in terms of this planning. So from there now notice that wedding is at the top level. So that means that this is the ultimate goal of all this work, is to have a wedding. So now, but when we go to the next level here, invitations, food, and bridal, then we have those now at level 2. Now notice that you can label them. You can use the what we call the DFD approach, where you start with the zero naming, with the zero, and it doesn't have to be 0 point. You can just call it 0. So 0. Then we have these levels here. Now normally this one for work breakdown structure, we don't go to 0 point because just because this one is starting from 0, and that's so that's a kind of a difference between work breakdown structure and the DFD. Of course, they are not exactly the same, but you can use the same approach for naming, numbering if you want. So this we are showing that these are, and see now there is a problem here. This document is not labeled very well, because the numbering should actually be according to the levels. And so what we should have done is, well, because these are the top levels here, we can put just 1, 2, 3. So that's okay. So that's a component 1, component 2, and component 3. But then as we go down, we show the relationship by using the same numbering. So this, whatever comes here should be 1 point something. Whatever comes out, this should be 2 point something. And whatever comes from here is 3 point something. And so in this case, that's okay. So what we could ask ourselves is now, so when we go to the list, what are those items that should come under invitations? And remember, those items, when you put them together, they make invitations. Now, for the sake of time, I may not give us a moment to really do that. but I'll make sure that this document is added to our portal, so you can use it for just doing an exercise on this. And of course, there are so many other documents other diagrams that in the main document has a number of WBS examples that you need to make sure that you look at them and study them well, and just have an idea about the WBS from what I'm trying to recap about them. But for the sake of more explanations, let's see, what should we put under invitation? So unfortunately, if I so just look at this list, and based on our diagram, which is not possible to show both at the same time, what do you think from this list we should add as part of, as coming below the part written invitations? And so it's not a long list. I think it should be possible to just skim through it and just have an idea of some of these items. What looks like it should come under the box of invitations. All right. Sorry, we can't have both at the same time, but let me see what your suggestion is at the chat there. So let me allow us a bit of interaction, just a short time of interaction. Based on the list there, what do you think can be put under the box of invitations? So let me bring the box of invitations up. I think that might be helpful in doing that small interaction. So if so, the box of invitation is the first box to the left of our diagram. So unfortunately, you can't have both going at the same time because our screen is not as wide. Okay, so at least let me see a bit of chatting there. At least one item that you believe should be on the under the box of invitations as part of the building up this work breakdown structure. All right, so let me see your response at the chat there. Just we can just use like 5 minutes. We do that interaction a bit. What item would you consider would come under the invitations box? So notice that the invitations box, you see there is this line here, which is a connector line. Of course, sometimes you can draw your breakdown structure this way, normally because of space. But otherwise, when the space is available, we prefer the one that looks like the way wedding is connected to these three. That's the way we prefer them drawn. But when the space is small on your page, you can draw what should have been this line should have been the one which was horizontal, but now it is drawn vertically. But then what is important is that you see these boxes are connected to the invitations box up here. In other words, these boxes are under the invitations box, and so whatever you put there under these boxes to this left part of our document, this should be all connected to the invitations box above them. Okay, so what are the attempts there? What activity would you add under the invitations box from the list that we had above there? So I'll bring the list up again. I think that may be helpful as you continue to think through this. All right. Let me bring up the list now. There's a back. We go back to the document page with the list. And again, let me see if maybe I can reduce the size of this list. It's taking that is done for the sake of making it clearer. Easier to display for everybody, but we can try to reduce a bit. Maybe let's see. No, it won't be possible to reduce it at this point. But anyway, so I think most of the items are clear. You can see this list is not a long list. So we should be able to see some of the items that you think should be under the. In this case, don't worry about any order. In fact, that one does not have an order because all of them are put under the same level. So what items should be under the invitations box in the WBS from this list? All right. Anybody? Now you can see the list. So what would you consider should be under the invitations box in the WBS? I'm just allowing just a few minutes because this is just a recap. I want to go to the main discussion of the day, which is project time management. Okay, well, I can't see anybody trying to say something, to write something there. Anybody writing your suggestion there? All right, let me then allow you more time. Just maybe you can. I can let you just look at that at your own time. So I'll put this example work breakdown structure in the our portal for as an item to consider as a part of your activities. You draw this work breakdown structure and try to fill in those items. I think that would be a good exercise so that you start getting a little more familiar with the work breakdown structure. But all the same, you can continue writing there as we continue with our main discussion for the day. So you can write your responses. It's all right as we continue. So let me now share the main document for the day, and that is to share on. We want to share. So I'm removing that one, and I'm going to mount up the other one. So we're looking at the work breakdown structure. No, sorry. We want to share to look at time management. project time management. Okay, project time management. So I'm sharing the document that will guide us in our discussion in that area. Project time management. And some of the, thank you, it's already sharing there. So project time management is the one which is associated with the concept of a critical path. And so you notice that, the name of the document, you may not see that, but the name of the document has a name of critical path. But the main subject here is project time management. Let me do some zooming here and see if we can get a better view of the text. All right, so project time management processes. Now, this document has a list of words here which are defined in different, defined for us for the sake of understanding issues that relate to project time management. And now these definitions will not discuss on them. I will probably just highlight one or two, but please make sure that when you look at the document, you can you look at the definitions and acquaint yourself with all the definitions. So it talks about activity definition, activity sequencing, and our activity definition here is not defining really the activity, it's just saying how you do that. The process of identifying activities for the project. So activity definition, activity sequencing, activity resource estimating, activity duration estimating, schedule development, schedule control, etc. So please look at this document later and make sure that you actually can do those descriptions that are given here, defining these various terminologies that come up in planning for time management. But I think this one is important. Maybe this one is important just to highlight. Activity definition says that it is identifying the specific activities that the project team members and stakeholders must perform to produce the project deliverable. So identifying the specific activities. So what are going to be the activities in this project? And of course, that together with that, when you identify the activities, then you also identify who is going to be responsible for executing a given activity. Then activity sequencing, this is also important for us. Of course, all the others are important, just picking those that are very, very key. Activity sequencing, again, here it says, is identifying and documenting the relationships between the project activities. So activity sequencing has something to do with being aware of which activities, how do the activities relate and which ones might actually affect each other when you are executing the project. Okay, so another one that I may just highlight is schedule control. Schedule control says controlling and managing changes to the project schedule. So there is the issue of controlling and managing changes to the project schedule. So sometimes you may have said that this will be done after, in week 2, but then you make changes. You decide, no, this one maybe can wait for one reason or the other. You are making some change. All right, so that's definitions on some of the very, very important terminologies associated with this particular area And so when it comes to activity definition, this is given more explanations here. An activity or task is an element of work normally found on the WBS, but not necessarily. It may not appear on the WBS, but most of the activities should be appearing on your WBS. So you notice now there is therefore some kind of a connection between WBS and the time management. So you notice that these tasks, these activities that you are going to define will be captured at the WBS. So the WBS therefore becomes an important tool even in time management. So again, reading that is that activity definition, an activity or task is an element of work normally found on the WBS that has an expected duration, a cost, and a resource requirement. So an activity or a task, and that actually is sometimes also this activity has expected duration, a cost, and a resource. So that's an activity, and this duration, cost, resource is sometimes is also how we define. Sometimes also define a project using similar words. But of course, the project is the whole of it from all the activities that you do make the project in terms of now describing, differentiating between just an activity within the project and the project itself. All right, so project schedules grow out of the basic documents that initiate a project. So including the project charter, which includes start and end dates. So the project charter should include start and end dates and budget information. Then we have the scope statement. Then there is a WBS. So all these are important in developing the schedule and planning for the time of the project, the time that each activity should use, the durations, as well as the total time that the whole project should use. So these are some of the key components that help towards that. So you need the project charter ahead, you need the scope statement, you need the WBS, etc. Of course, the WBS, remember we said, can be a diagram or can just be a text, but the text should be ordered in certain ways. Even the diagram, the items in the diagram should be ordered in a certain way. Now, when it comes to other issues, I think I will let you also read the rest of that part. But there's another component here that is important to mention, the concept of a milestone. So when we talk about a project and also time management, we also talk about a milestone. Now, by definition, in project management literature, we say a milestone is a significant event that normally has no duration. A milestone is a significant event that normally has no duration. Now, that might not be very clear because one is asking yourself, now how can you have an event that has no duration? But when you highlight a few examples, then you realize, yes, that's possible. Because, for example, you say, when you say what you have accomplished, you see when you say what you have accomplished, those are what are the milestone, is the achievement. What have we achieved so far? So, for example, if you say we have started the project, you have started the project. Now that's a milestone. But this word event here is also used in terms of how you now do the planning. For example, if you draw a diagram indicating the maybe activity durations and how they follow each other from the start to the end, then you find that there will be those points where you just put a word like start. But that word start, you can't say, what duration is start. What duration is start? The start is simply a point along maybe a timeline. And then when you end the project, you say now we have come to the end of the project. Maybe you have finished everything that needed to be done. So then you might put the word finish in your diagram. You might put the word end. Now, those are what we are saying. They are events that normally has no duration. So when the point when you start, that's an event you have started. It's an event of starting. When you finish, that is an event of finishing. Now, those are what we are calling milestones. They are milestones. They mark a point in time. In time of what is being accomplished. So that's the word milestone that is important. I think the other ones are almost the way they appear in English language. Activity sequencing. So what is that? What is to sequence? What about dependencies and a relationship? So some activities have of course, all activities have there is a kind of a relationship, but there are those which the relationships that they are dependent on each other. You see, there are some in certain cases, the relationship between some activities is that they are dependent on each other. There is a dependency, and maybe an example of a dependency would say, for you to have done your let's say maybe if you are to go to university, which of course right now you are, you needed to have done the what we call a KCSE. You see, now going to university is dependent on having done and passed KCSE. So that's a dependency. So those are type of. So we do have different types of relationships, and in some cases, the relationship is one of a dependency. So these are many terminologies that I'll let you look at them at your own time. So the types of dependencies, we have mandatory dependencies. So down here we have discretionary dependencies, and we also have external dependencies. So different way of describing different relationships. So now when it comes to the dependencies, because now you say those which have dependencies, they depend on each other. So we have mandatory dependencies, there is discretionary dependencies, there is external dependencies. So I will leave the definitions for you to read later, and I proceed on to what we call network diagrams. Network diagrams. One of the important components of looking at the issue about time management and planning is the concept of network diagrams. So it is, as it says there, network diagrams are used to analyze activities in a project. Network diagrams are used to analyze activities in a project and to estimate minimum duration of a project and to estimate minimum duration of a project. A network diagram is used in critical path method and PAT, or project evaluation and a review technique. But most of the time we just say PAT, P-E-R-T. A network diagram is also referred to as path chart. A network diagram is also referred to as path chart. All right, so network diagrams are the preferred technique for showing activity sequencing. Network diagrams are the preferred technique for showing activity sequencing. A network diagram is a schematic display of the logical relationships among or sequencing of project activities. A network diagram is a schematic display of the logical relationships among all sequencing of project activities. And there are two main formats for drawing network diagrams. There are two formats for drawing network diagrams. These are arrow diagramming method and precedence diagramming method. Arrow diagramming method and precedence diagramming method. And we start looking at the first approach, which is a arrow diagramming method. And this diagram here, let me see. Now, let me first of all, okay, now I think we can go on. I would bring up another document later, but for now we can go on with this one. So arrow diagramming method is also known as activity on arrow diagramming method. Activity on arrow, all in short, AOA. Sorry, I think I touched something. All right, so we have arrow diagramming method, which is also known as AOA. And the diagram here, which we're looking at, is an example of a diagram which is based on arrow diagramming method. Now, this diagram here actually is based on certain activities. We have certain activities that are not showing here except in the diagram. So when you draw a diagram and you use the method called arrow activity on arrow diagramming method, then your diagram will look like this that we can see. Sorry, I should have put the table that now where are these activities coming from. Normally you'll be given a list of activities. If you require to draw a network diagram, you'll be given a list of activities, and it will be explained how the various activities, those activities in your list, how they relate to each other. I think for the sake of better clarity on this, let me just share that table. It's actually somewhere in the diagram here. But I should have put it up there, but I think I forgot to put it up there. So let me have it. It must be somewhere down here. You should see that table of activities here. In this case, is a draw as a table. So let me just first of all show what the activities that we are referring to. I think I forgot to get the right document with that table. Should have been up there. But this table, which again I'm going to try and see if I can reduce it. So it's may not work for now to try and reduce the size. All right, but at least we can see now this it has only those three columns that you can see right now. Okay, so those three columns where you can see the left column there has these letters A, B, C, D. And so this A, B, C, D going up to J are activities in a project. And then we see the durations of each of these activities. Actually, this one should be in weeks. So I don't know if I can type that one. This is supposed to be duration in weeks. And then you see what is called precedence or predecessors. The precedents show the relationship between various activities. And these, of course, are the dependency. These are the activities showing, of course, that if they are the relationship is one of a dependency or it is not of dependency. So precedence indicate activities that must be done before another one can be done. Now, in case when you have dependency, there are activities that must be done ahead of others. There are all activities that must be done ahead of others. For example, when building a house, you cannot talk of putting the doors of the house before you actually build the structure, the external structure in one way or the other. At least something must be done before you can actually put the doors. In natural circumstances, we expect there to be walls. You put the walls before you can put the doors, or at least the place where the door will be placed. Because of course, we need the wall first, and then of course the wall within the wall you have left the space where the door will be fitted later. But notice that you need to build the wall before you can actually position the door. Of course, the door in this case we are not saying that creating it and having it somewhere. We're saying putting it where it will actually be when the house is done. You cannot put the door there before you actually put up the walls of the house. So there are those situations where the precedence, when we talk about the precedence, we are saying there is an activity that must be done first before another activity can be done. So of course, it's just like we are talking about, going to university and the KCSE. We expect that there is that dependency and precedent where you do the KCSE. Once you do the KCSE, then you go to university. So if you had the activity called do KCSE, another one called go to university, then we'll have something showing in our diagram that shows that KCSE, or at least a KCSE, must be done before going to university. And that is what this column talking about the precedence is about. And that should show when now we draw the network diagram. When you draw the network diagram, it should show this information here should guide us as to how we should draw the network diagram, or at least how we show the activities in a relationship to each other. And that is what the diagram that we are seeing earlier on is actually based on this particular table. It's based on this particular table, the diagram that we were seeing earlier on, which was activity on arrow diagram. So let me just try to go back to the diagram there. I hope you have tried to create a mental image of this data here, the activities, but maybe let me just highlight a few things again here. Now you notice that this is activity A. Of course, it's not labeled, just can be any activity, but instead we are using an ID to name the activity. Activity A, activity B, activity C, etc. So activity A, if you look at the line for activity A, it is saying that activity A will need 1 week, because this is the duration in weeks. It will require 1 week to do. That's what we mean by the duration. It will require 1 week to do. Just in case you sense any challenge with the audio, let me always know as we continue. But for now, it's like everything is going very well for us, and we certainly do appreciate that situation for now. All right, so along the activity A, we have the duration part is 1, so it means that activity A will require 1 week to complete. And then when you look at the column of the precedence, there is nothing. So it means that activity A can be done anytime. It does not depend on any other activity. There is no activity that needs to be done in order for activity A to go on in the project. When you go to activity B, we find that at the duration column, there is a 2, meaning that activity B would require 2 weeks to do, to complete, regardless of which date do you start it. And now I need to also remind us that all these are, of course, are estimates. So your estimation in terms of when you are doing your planning is that activity B will require 2 weeks to complete. Now, there are certain things that are very easy to estimate, but others, of course, it is might be based on calculations, which might still be a kind of estimates. For example, when we say, okay, if you are planning maybe a party, and we say now, so how much food should we make? Of course, first of all, is there we do 2 estimations, unless, of course, it's the kind that we say estimations is by invitations only. But assuming that it is, okay, let's say that one. Yeah, if it's by estimation, in this case, is by invitations only. So if we release 100 cards for invitations, then we know that we are inviting 100 people. So that may be almost an exact. It may not be called estimation, that one, when we say I'm expecting 100 people. But of course, there is still a estimation there, because maybe you never know, or you might have forgotten an important friend later on. You realize, oh, yes, and then you might say, okay, well, it's a close friend, so whether they were given an invitation card or not, maybe, or maybe you have on the site some invitation cards that are just available just in case somebody was forgotten and who is a very important friend. Well, but assuming that you are done with the invitations, and actually they would just be exact as the cards that you have sent out, then of course that may be very exact. But then now when it comes to the food, you say now, so how much food should we now prepare for these 100 guests? And of course, that one is in terms of the amount of food that you may make. In most cases, it's more of an estimation. It's very difficult to tell how much will be eaten, of course, and because people, of course, they feed differently. But anyway, so most of the times we do a lot of estimations when we are working with the figures as to how much of these and how much of that. Most of the time we do a lot of estimations, but some of them are guided by what has happened in the past. What has happened in the past, in many cases, guide us in making the estimations. But sometimes there are some things that can be calculated, and so again, they still may be estimates, but we might also be guided by calculations. Now, going back to the row, the B row here, is that B would take 2 weeks according to our table. But when we go to the precedence column here, there is nothing indicating that B also does not depend on any other activity, which means it can be done anytime. It can be done anytime, as long as we still have 2 weeks before where we want to end. Because again, you must also decide when you estimate this project to end. Now we'll come to that later. So as long as you still have at least 2 weeks before the end, then you can do activity B anytime. But again, that one may not be a correct position, because if there are activities that depend on B, then you cannot just start B anytime. Because if you delay too much starting your B activity, then it means that there are certain things that will be held without being done. And that is what we're saying also now, going back to the analogy of the house and the door. If you don't build the walls, then you will never be able to fit the door. So you although maybe Of course, this is not the right analogy, but I'm just going back to the dependency. So if there is an activity that is depending on, or others are depending on it, then the earlier you do it, the better. Because so when you build the walls at a certain point early in the project, then it will help us also to decide on the door early. So although B is not being affected by any other activity, then we should not say that we can start any time, but it simply means that it is not going to affect, it is not affected by any other activity. It does not have to wait. In fact, the best way to look at it is to say this activity does not have to wait for another one. This activity does not have to wait for another one to be done. So in most cases, those types of activities are the ones which we start with. Those that are not depending on anything else to be done are normally the ones which we start with. So, and the same case applies to C. So when you come to the precedence column, C does not need to wait for any other. It does not have a predecessor. It does not have a predecessor. So a predecessor is what comes before. Now notice that I think the word that is easier for us is a successor, the one who comes after. Successor, to succeed somebody or succeed in something, come after something. So this word is normally used in a relationship to that one, precedent or predecessor versus successor. So predecessor is the one which comes before another one, is a predecessor, the precedence. So C does not need, there is no activity that C must wait to be done. So it can be done immediately. It can be done, and as I have said, these type of activities are the ones which are done fast. Now, before I go back to the diagram, let me just also highlight D in the table here. So with the D, therefore, first of all, it will require a duration of 4 weeks to complete. To complete. D will require 4 weeks to complete. But then when you come to the precedence column, there is A. Now, what that tells us is that you must do A before you can do D. So you'll not be able to do D until you do A. A must be done, then D comes after A is done. Not necessarily immediately, although in this case it is, but it must be done. It can never be done. D can never be done if A is not done. So it's a case of the door and the wall. The door cannot be fitted until the wall is done. So do the wall, then you can fit the door. At least, it may not be immediate, but at least the wall must be standing before you can fit the door. So A must be done before you can start. You can ever start D. A must be done before you can ever start to do your D activity. Okay, so you have these activities, and then you need now to draw the diagram for them, a network diagram for these activities. So how do you go about that? Now, that is what gives us, those considerations that I've just been highlighting are what gives us, what we are seeing, the diagram that you are seeing up there. It's actually appearing twice, but let me go to the one which is up here. Right. Okay, so this diagram here, of course, is doing a little too, aesthetically, but you don't have to do it this way. You just actually just draw a circle, where you see we call them the nodes. So when you are doing this work, you just draw just a simple circle and put your numbers there. So these we call them the nodes, where you see the numbers here. These numbers 1, 2, 3, we call them the nodes. Now, this 1, 2, 3 have nothing to do with the, of course, they are labeled according to the activities there. Notice now, I think unfortunately, now these numbers actually are not labeling activities. They are just labeling the nodes. So you say this is node 1, this is node 2, this is node 3, this is node 4, etc. So they have nothing to do with the data that we put in our diagram in the table that I was displaying. But when you of course you need to still label your nodes. But now this diagram is based on what we are calling the method called activity on node diagram. Activity on node diagram is activity. Is activity on arrow. Sorry, this is the activity on arrow. Activity on arrow. Now, so these are the arrows. So at the arrows here, you put the name of the activity. So the activity name is the one which labels the arrow. The activity names the arrow. And also include the durations. So you say this is activity A, which has duration of 1 week. In this case, the durations are in weeks. So A equals 1, and you put that as the label for your arrow, this arrow here. Now, notice again, this diagram, as I said, when you start your activities, the activities that are not having precedence normally are the activities that we start with. And so you see these activities here, activity A, activity B, activity C. They all start from the starting point of your diagram. The starting, so one is the starting point. In fact, these are what we are calling the milestones. Okay, so one is a milestone. I mean, this is just labeling a milestone, the starting point of the project as a diagram. Now, of course, you are putting this one, explaining or expressing the activities of your project in a diagram form and showing the relationships of the activities and their dependencies. And so we have this activity on arrow diagram. So this node is simply marking the start of the project. And it's showing that when we start the project, we can have activity A starting and activity B starting and activity C starting, and they can all start at the same time, but at least they must start, they can start anytime, except in a relationship to when you want the project to end. If you want the project to end at a certain time, then these activities also cannot start any time. They must start at a certain time, but they are normally the ones which you start with. Those with no precedence are normally the activities that we start with. And then from there now, we follow the dependencies to guide us as to where will these other activities go? Where will they go in the diagram? And that is now an issue of deciding which activities depend on A, which activities have A as a precedent, and which are those which have B as a precedent, and which are those which have C as a precedent. Now, if you follow the path of A here, I'll go back to the table again so that we can see what we're looking at. You notice that this A, of course, now 2 marks the completion of activity A. This node labeled 2 simply marks the end or the finishing of doing activity A. So maybe this could be like what we're saying. I think the building of a house is a more common concept. So, for example, maybe here we say now, if you are doing a stone house, of course, there are some things that you do even before you start, building the walls. You have to dig the trenches for the stone, the foundation. For the foundation, you dig the trenches and you put now the stone for the foundation. So what comes before what. So when you finish, so for example, this may be you have the arrow may be showing the process of digging the trench for the foundation. So and then how long does it take? So that is activity A. And then of course it comes to a finish. You say I have finished the trenches for the foundation. I've finished digging the trenches. So that would be what we are marking with this node, and now we are labeling 2. Now we can use any other way to label our nodes, but this is for this diagram we have chosen the numbers. So 2 marks finishing of activity A. Now notice that along this line, it is followed by D here. And then when you continue with that path, if you can call it a path, it continues on to 5. And from 5 then, it continues along this arrow, which is labeled H. And then when it comes to 6, we can say if we are to continue to the very end, then we join this arrow, which takes us to 8. So how does that, how do we end up coming with that? Now, first of all, let me say that the way you draw this diagram, the shape it takes is not really so much of an issue. The shape is not graded. We don't mark the how the shape of your diagram. What is important is the relationship between the activities. Your diagram should at least show your activities very well, as best you can show. And so therefore, let me reduce that size. I think it's a bit too big again. All right. So when you draw the diagram, now I want us to go back now to look at the table and see how is it that we have it looking. Those activities, the path going from 1 to 2 for A, and then it follows 2 to 5. Now notice that, of course, the numbering sounds bad, but of course, as a path, it takes a D. From A, that path continues from 5 to 6, and then finally to 8. So let's go back to the table and relate the table with that diagram again. So let me go down. Sorry, I had meant to have this document actually, that this table to high. I don't know. I forgot to save that change. So the diagram is here. I mean, the table is here, and it's saying that now, if you can remember, now let me just try to do it here in a simple way. That if you follow the path of A, you had A, then moving to, now notice the work I'm doing here. So you have A, then the path moved to D, right? Of course, I'm just putting the activities the way they are labeled on the arrows, not the nodes this time. Is the way the activities are showing following each other in along the arrows. So A to D, D to what? Sorry, I have to check. I am forgetting. Sorry. Let's say just there is a diagram that is closer here, so we should not go very high up. Okay, so from D it moved to, now the arrow here says H. It goes to H, and then from H to J. So you need to remember that as you go to the where I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to do it close to the table here, so we can quickly check from the table why the path is looking at that. So this went to H, okay, and then from H to went to J. From H to went to J. All right. So why is that? Now, before we answer that question, let me allow us a short moment of interaction again, just in case there is an explanation that you'd like to raise related to our discussion so far. But we are not going to take so long today. So we almost concluding our presentation for today. But let me allow any question. So let me remove the share so we can interact just a few minutes, 5 minutes again. Raise a comment or a clarification. All right, so let me remove the share. I'm going to share it in a short while. So any question in our discussion so far, or in our anything that we have said that you feel that need to be made clearer regarding network diagrams? As so far we are all looking at this one called the method called activity on arrow diagram. Activity on arrow diagram. Any question related to to that? Any question related to that concept, the concepts that we have shared so far? Any question? All right. I can't see any. Yes, we can wait for Hamza to say something there. Are you raising a question? Hamza is trying to write something. No, it's a Kiprop. Any question, any clarification on some of the concepts that you have raised so far regarding time management and using these tools we call network diagrams? They are important tools in project management, especially in the area of time management and sequencing or scheduling of activities. The network diagrams and how we draw them. As I said, the shape that finally your diagram may assume is not important. What is important is that what you have drawn is representing the activity dependencies correctly. All right. So, for example, now we're saying that from A, the diagram, that path, and of course you can call them paths. The path from A moves to D, or at least D connects to A. D connects to A directly. So that is important. If you see, like, if you saw a diagram where your D is connecting to C, we'll have a problem with that. So that is important that we understand how the activities are depend, how the activities depend on each other, how activities are sequenced in a relation or in a relationship to each other. All right, no comment, no point of qualification. As I can see. So I go back to the diagram. Let me go back to the diagram again as it is. Let me share the screen and display the document again. All right. Previously it shared so fast, so I hope it is doing the same. That it will share. Yes, it's quick. We are very, very grateful today. We have a very fast system, is working very fast. All right, so going back to our explanation, this diagram that this demonstration I'm doing here, from the diagram that we have seen there, it is showing that okay, now the activities that are after the A are the ones which are critical here, and showing that D comes after A, or it follows the path of A, and of course immediately after A. H, of course, is in the same path, but but comes after D along the path. Okay, H comes after D along the path, and a J, actually J is the last activity to be done. According to the diagram, it's going to be the last activity to be done. And so, from that diagram is that J comes after H in that path. Now, exactly how does that relate to our table? You notice that when you go to D, it has A as a precedent. D has A as a precedent. In other words, you must complete A in order to start doing D. Complete A, then start to do D. When you complete A, you can start doing the D. So that's what the diagram means by having A or D following the path from A. So this, the way the various activities are connected to each other is because of what we are reading from the table. And sometimes it's not a table; it's just description. So the description of the activity is that is what is giving us the way we are putting our activities in the diagram. So for you to start your D, A must be done and complete. When you complete A, now you can start D. Now notice the others. So H and J. When you come to H, it says that the precedents for H are D and E. So you cannot start H until D is done and completed, as well as E is done and completed. Those two activities must be done and complete, both of them, not one of them, but both of them must be done and completed. It does not matter their durations relative to each other. It means, of course, therefore, that you must wait for the one which takes the longest duration of between these two before you can start doing activity H. But in this case, of course, here in my demonstration, I'm just showing the path from A. And it shows that along the path, that path will have also H along that path. After D is completed, and of course E, then you can do the H. But it's essentially in this case just showing us that D must complete before you can do H. Sorry. Then when you come to J, we go to J, which is right in the bottom of my table here. And I want to believe that you are seeing that part clearly. I can raise it just slightly up. So H, it shows that for H to be done, J. For J to be, essentially it's like for J to start being done, for J to start being done, you cannot start doing activity J. It's just like we are saying you cannot fit the door. For you to start fitting the door, the wall must be standing. So it's the same thing we're saying. For J to be started, then these three activities here must be done and completed, all of them. So you must complete F, you must complete H, you must complete I. Once those three activities are completed, then you can now start doing activity J. Now, but of course, in our case here, our demonstration that we are doing is only for the path coming from A. So for the path coming from A, J is on the path of A because H is also in the path of A. And it's showing that H is a precedent. H is a precedent of completing. Is a precedent of activity J. So H must be done in order, and once it is completed, and of course also the others. Notice that you must complete all these three before you can start doing activity J. But in terms of the paths, the path from A, then J is there because of the H, because it says that J does depend on the completion of H as well. So of course there are some activities that may be dependent on the completion of several other activities rather than just one. All right. So it's just like you can say, you cannot start using the house. Well, of course, this is just the ideal. The ideal is that you cannot start living in the house before the whole of the activities are completed. You're digging the trenches, putting the walls, putting the doors, putting the windows, plastering, all those activities. So if you are to put you living in the house as part of the activity, would have to have so many activities showing the precedence. That will be having so many precedents. But of course, we are not likely to have that. But just trying to give that analogy that some activities depend on so many others or several others to complete before they can be started. And that is the explanation now as to why that diagram is the way it is. Now with that demonstration now, and going back to the diagram. So let me go back to the diagram again. So we go. So this time here, I can just use the one which is slightly closer here. All right. And this document is already at the portal, so you can look at it and see all these diagrams and all the explanations. So the way the diagram is following from that table, and it is indicating that. And remember, these are activity on arrow diagram, activity on arrow, activity on arrow, no mushale. All right. So the way the paths are showing is that D. Sorry, I think I pressing something by mistake. That is creating a problem here. So let me see what I did. I think I pressed something. So let me go back. All right. So it's showing that D must be completed before. A. Okay, let me do it left to right. So A must be completed before you can start D. D must be completed before you can start H. H must be completed before you can start J. Now let's talk about this part here, which has 2 arrows coming to node 5. 2 arrows coming to node 5. Now, this is where now an activity is dependent on several activities completing. So, for example, this one, 2 activities completing. So, D and E must be completed before you can do activity H. Okay. Remember, this is an activity on arrow diagram, and that's why it is showing like that. The activities are shown on the arrow. So, activity D and activity E must be completed before activity H can start. Now, notice here, for these other cases which we have not discussed, but at least looking at the diagram, we see this node here, node 6. Node 6 is the start of activity J. Node 6 is the activity, or indicates the start of activity J. And these arrows, 3 of them coming to finish or to point at the same node, indicates that this activity J requires all these three activities to be completed before it can start. So for you to start activity J, you must finish activity H, activity F, and activity I. You must complete those three activities before you can start to go on with activity J. And activity J is actually the last activity before this project is completed. It will be the last activity before the project is completed in its entirety. And that is how this diagram comes up. It is when you make those considerations, which activities must be completed ahead of others. Now that is what brings us to have these activities, or these the parts in the diagram making these particular the way they are positioned. And of course, that is what gives us a shape. Now, the shape may not necessarily be the way it looks here. It must not look exactly like this. What is important, as I said, is how you show the dependencies of the various activities. But if you are drawing activity on a node diagram, activity on arrow. I'm always going to the other one, which we'll be discussing later, but not today. So this activity on arrow diagram, you must of course have the nodes. Of course, you must have the nodes indicating the start and end points of your activities. So you must have the nodes. So start by doing the first node, then draw the first activities that start. Normally, for the activities that don't have do not have a precedence, we always, as I said, they are the ones which put at the starting point. So when you mark your starting point, then you start. You have your nodes that do not have precedence starting from that node. And so if one is our starting node, then we have activity A starting from there, and activity B starting from there, and activity C also starting from there. The diagram indicates for that, but this should be coming from the information given either in form of a table or a description that is made using text. The reason why putting this one must be coming, it is information that we are getting from somewhere. It could be, like in our case here, from the table. That's what is informing us to do this. And these activities do not have a precedence, and therefore they cannot start at the starting point here. And so when we draw them, of course, we need to, to separate them so that our diagram, of course, again, can make a better shape, or at least can be easier for somebody to read it. Of course, we need, to be a little aesthetic, and therefore we separate the arrows to create space for doing the other nodes. So you notice that the arrows here are drawn kind of A and a C, of course, moving outwards. This is only for the sake of making sure that, of course, finally when the diagram is complete, that is, it is looking at least somehow neat, not the shape, but at least it's neat. Somebody can follow, is able to see which arrow is moving to what other point, and which activity is following which other activity. At least make sure that your diagram will be neat and clear by the end it is completing. Unfortunately, we can never know everything until the diagram is complete, and so some of these things, sometimes you may be forced to create a what we call a sketch and just see the approximate way that the arrows will move, so that you know how to better draw your diagram, just for the sake of clarity, that somebody will be able to read easily your diagram. So, but anyway, that's why we are putting the C and the A arrows kind of moving upwards, is simply to make sure that finally it will be easy for somebody to read our diagram, and everything, our information in the diagram is looking clear. One can follow it easily enough. And so that's about the method that we are calling the activity on arrow diagramming method, where we indicate the activities on the arrow. We put the activities they become like the label on the arrow. So at A, you label it there at etc. Now notice here for the activity that is depending on two activities. Activity H depends on the completion of D and E. And notice that normally, of course, in this one, I think I'm already starting to think of the other one, which we'll do later, the one we call the precedence diagramming method. So let me not go to that. So for this one, it's just indicating the activities, the start and the end of the activity, and then the correct paths for each activity. And of course, where an activity depends on two activities, how to correctly do that, where it may be depending on several other activities. Again, we have that. And again here, the way we draw activity E and activity F, that is also important for the sake of clarity and neatness. Again, this may be a bit tricky because you don't know which arrow may actually, which is the best way to place your arrows. But again, that's why I'm saying sometimes drawing a small sketch, normally if it's an exam, it does not have so many activities because of course time is also important. So it is possible to create a sketch, just a rough diagram, see how they are, the best way the arrows should move, and then you draw your final diagram so that it is neat and clear. When the examiner is marking, can see your diagram clearly. So sometimes that requires for you to know, like a case like this one, which arrow should be, like here is going upwards rather than this one is going horizontally. So which one should be horizontal, which should be going up, and other decisions might be based on a sketch, diagram before drawing your final diagram. Now, I think that is sufficient for today. I will do a recap a bit about this when we will be looking at the next method of drawing a network diagram, which is called the precedence diagramming method, is what we'll be looking as the other method. But the only thing that maybe I highlight here is that when we draw the network diagrams, we use them also to help us find what is called the critical path. In many cases, you'll be asked find the critical path or identify the critical path. So the path, of course, are these. What we are calling it, the path is like now moving from A to D to H to J here, and then coming to the end of the last node. So those are the paths. So if you go A, D, H, J, that is one path. When you go B, E, H, J, that's another path. So you can think of them as like roads to a town, roads to a certain town. So what is a path? And sometimes we have different roads, or you can for different directions to reach a certain place. Maybe a better analogy would be a certain building in town. You can imagine a building right in the middle of or somewhere in town in the Nairobi city center. If you say, for example, you are in let's say you are in what we normally call the Machakos bus station, Machakos bus station, the main bus station in for up what we call the country transport. Machakos the bus station there is called a Machakos bus station. If you're at Machakos bus station and you want to go to Hilton Hotel, you can take me the paths. There are so many, the streets and all that in town. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So the path, so which direction can you take finally to reach there? So the other path is B. So you have said B, E, H, J is a one path. From B again is B, F, J, another path. And notice the paths should be labeled according to the arrows should face only one direction. You shouldn't go to the opposite of an arrow. The path should always be to the direction the arrow is pointing. So these are the one C. You can go. Another path is C, and of course this is from the start node to the end node. That's what we are calling the path. So from the start node to the end node. So for C, if you follow the C, you go C, then to G, then to I, and then finally to J to reach the end. So those are the paths. So out of those ones, therefore, which is the critical path? Which is the critical path? And the critical path is supposed to be when you add the durations. Like here, it's if you look, if you go this ADHJ, you add 1 to 4 to 6 to 3, and you get the total duration along that path. So what is the total duration along that path? And so that path, so we talk about the critical path. The critical path is after we have done those additions, the one which has the highest value total, the highest total value along a certain path, that path is called the critical path. And of course, it's worked here. So you look at this example, and you'll see how the critical path is decided. For this case, what is a critical path? Of course, we see that the path here is the one which has the longest is these totals. The longest is the one which has 16. Now, this is saying days. Of course, it means that our numbers here are in days. So 16 days. So these 16 days. So this therefore will be the critical path. The path DEHJ. The path DEHJ is the critical path. Sometimes you are just asked the critical activities. The critical activities. Critical activities are simply the activities on the critical path. All right, so I think with that, that's sufficient for today. I think, as I said, we will recap on a bit about the activity on arrow diagram and also the critical path. So for today, I think that is sufficient. But once again, so let me remove the share now. This document is already at the portal. Please find it there. Look at all those activities. Try to read the examples. And even that table, as I said, is actually part of the document, but it's slightly several pages down. Try to locate it. And just a reminder again, there is one statement issue that is raised at the discussion forum for this particular discussion. So look at the discussion forum for this class. Make sure that you leave your reply before you leave the meeting, before you finally leave the time of this class. Leave a reply at the discussion forum. It's just a simple question, a simple issue that it's raising there about the work breakdown structure, the relationship between work breakdown structure and time management, or activity sequencing and activity durations. Look at that discussion at the discussion forum. Try to answer that or to leave your reply before the end of the class. But otherwise, for the presentation, I think that is sufficient for today. So unless there is a question, we're just about to end this presentation. Any question? I think I can allow us to ask a question. Actually, I extended you that what I had planned, but I think it's also helpful so we can catch up with the covering for the content for this unit. But that was also important because we are looking at that particular method of network diagramming, and it's important that we reach where we have reached, at least not so much halfway through. All right. Otherwise, if there is no point of clarification or question, then that is the end of the presentation by the lecturer for today. I'll let you now get to other activities for the class, and I've said leave a reply for the discussion forum. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and have a great afternoon as you continue with your activities for the day. So from Mwalimu, I say goodbye. Now this presentation is also recorded, so you'll be able to look at the video if you want. You can also just to follow with the discussion that has been brought by the lecturer. You can also look at the video later once it is developed by the system and put at our portal. Sorry, I've not been able to put it in the format that should be better, but you can still listen to it at the portal. So you can revisit the portal at some point and listen to this particular presentation. So as I said once again, thank you for being around. It's always a pleasure to have my students present in this class, and I wish you the very best for the remaining part of this afternoon. Enjoy yourself, and be blessed as you continue with other activities for the day. Once again, thank you and goodbye.